Welcome to another episode of our video series of the Critique of Modern Systems.
It's great to be back. And you! I trust you're having a good week so far.
I am, thank you. And I'm glad, because today we're tackling something that, well, it confuses almost everyone: money. We get so caught up in the day-to-day, the markets, the currency rates.
The symptoms?
Exactly, the symptoms. But the real question, the one we need to ask, is so much deeper, isn't it?
It is. We're here to look at the engine itself, not just the flashing warning lights on the dashboard. I mean, our goal here is to get past all that financial noise and really understand how societies build lasting value, real progress.
And real prosperity for people. That's the end goal.
It has to be. Maximum health, prosperity, peace. That's what it's all about. So we're going to look at a kind of historical formula, a civilization cycle, to see how the most successful societies actually achieve that.
I'm glad you call it a formula. Because if you, listening to this, have ever wondered why some countries or, even some companies or families seem to get stuck in the same loop of debt and problems, while others just seem to have this self-sustaining momentum, I think this framework is the answer. You call it the six-gear system.
That's right. It's a formula that we've seen work time and time again just by observing history. And the key thing is, for a society to reach that level of modern civilization we all want, these six gears have to be turning, and they have to turn together.
At the same time. Okay, so let's walk through them. What are these six gears? What has to be in motion?
Okay, so we start with the gears that are purely intellectual. The first one is philosophy. We can call it fail-safe. This is the absolute non-negotiable need for free thought, for questioning everything.
Just the ability to generate new ideas.
Precisely. And from that, gear two naturally emerges. Science, or Bilim. This is where you take that freewheeling philosophy and give it structure, a method.
Right. And from science, you
get technology. Gear three. That's the practical industrial application of what you discovered through science.
Okay, so we have philosophy, science, technology. What's next?
Next is the one everyone focuses on. Gear four. Money. Hera. The wealth, the capital, that's generated when your technology and industry are actually successful.
And once you have money, you have to protect it.
You have to. Which brings us to Gear 5, law, hukuk, a strong legal system to manage property, to protect all that value you've accumulated. And then finally, Gear 6,
which is
art and culture, sanat. This is the refining mechanism. It's how you transfer all that collective knowledge and wisdom onto the next generation so they don't have to start from scratch.
What strikes me immediately is that the first three stages you mentioned, philosophy, science, and even art, the last one, they require immense brain power, but maybe not that much initial cash.
Exactly. The initial investment is intellectual.
You don't need $1 billion budget to start thinking. But we always seem to undervalue that part.
And that's the fundamental mistake. If you look at Gear 1, philosophy, progress is just. It's impossible if a society is constantly looking backward or punishing new ideas. You can't drive a car forward if you're only staring in the rearview mirror.
We've seen that play out in history, haven't we? Especially in Asia.
Oh, absolutely. Think of China. Its greatest periods of flourishing were when it allowed different schools of thought to compete and thrive. Or look at the Indian subcontinent.
Oh.
The cultural environment there allowed for this incredibly deep abstract thinking. And out of that came maybe the single most important invention in mathematics. The number zero. About 1,400 years ago.
The concept of nothing that allows for, everything else.
Precisely. It was a philosophical breakthrough before it was a mathematical one, but think about it. Our entire modern world runs on that concept. Every bit of AI, every algorithm, the MRI machines in hospitals, your camera, it's all built on the ability to represent zero.
So if the intellectual climate is right, that's Gear 1, then the science, Gear 2, is almost inevitable. It has to follow.
It has to follow, even if it takes, centuries for the technology for Gear 3 to catch up and fully use it.
Which brings us to that third gear, technology. What happens when you have the knowledge, the science, but you don't manage to integrate it into your industry, into your economy?
The whole system just stalls. A country can be huge, it can have all the natural resources in the world, but if it can't turn its knowledge into competitive technology, it stays poor. And this is where we see the shocking results in Gear 4, in the money.
Okay, so let's get into the numbers. You gave us a really powerful comparison between a nation's output and a single company's.
It's stark. Take the Republic of Turkey. It exports, on average, about $18 million worth of goods an hour.
18 million an hour. Okay, that sounds like a huge number on its own.
It does, until you put it next to one company, just one, Apple. They generate about $30 million in sales per hour. Google's at around $16 million. So a single corporation running on intellectual capital is creating more value every 60 minutes than an entire nation state.
And you can see that gap in their financial health too, right? And their stability.
Without a doubt. I mean, look at the cash reserves. Apple has something like, what, over $200 billion in cash? That's value that's been built up, saved. Compare that to a country that's constantly worrying about its foreign currency reserves.
Wow.
And even more telling is the cost of borrowing. We saw a company like Nestle, a huge global firm, able to borrow money at 0% interest. At the same time, some countries were having to borrow at over 100%. The system rewards those who run the cycle correctly.
So the lesson couldn't be clearer. Money is the result. It's the exhaust from the engine, not the fuel.
Never the fuel.
And we saw this play out perfectly with Spain and Portugal, didn't we? After they colonized the Americas.
A perfect historical example. They shipped home literal mountains of gold and silver. I mean, the ultimate symbol of money. But they didn't have the other gears turning. No philosophy, no science, no real tech engine.
So the money just, flowed right through.
Like water in a leaky bucket. It didn't build anything. It didn't fix their economy. And eventually, they lost their economic power to places like Holland, who had actually done the hard work of running the full cycle. Wealth without the formula is just shiny metal.
So once a society does generate that wealth properly, gear 4, the system needs to be protected. That's gear 5, law. Why does the legal system only become critical after the money's there? Can't you have laws first?
Well, you have social rules, of course. But a formal legal system, hukuk, is for managing accumulation. When you're just hunting and gathering, you don't really need property law. But as soon as you start building factories, saving capital, planning for your children's inheritance, you need fixed, objective rules. Money can't survive in chaos.
And it has to be more than just rules written on a page. It has to be a system built on real justice.
Exactly right. There's a huge difference between just any law and a true legal system. A law could say, we're going to pay these 5 guys $1 million every week. That's a law, technically, but it's not justice. It destroys trust.
You pointed out that you could even see this difference in the physical layout of a courtroom.
You can. It's fascinating. In a mature legal system, the judge, the prosecutor, the defense, they all sit opposite each other. It's a triangle of equals. The design itself says that the highest value is protecting the innocent. Better to let 3 guilty people go free than to imprison 1 innocent person.
And in less developed systems.
The judge and the prosecutor might physically sit together, elevated above the defense. The layout implies their goal is unified punishment. And the unspoken principle becomes the opposite. They'd rather jail 3 innocent people to make sure they punish 1 guilty person. When that's the system, wealth gets terrified. It runs and hides.
That makes total sense. So that brings us to the final gear, gear 6, art and culture. I have to admit, this one seems like a surprise. After all the hard work of industry and law, why is art so essential? Is it just a nice to have?
Not at all. It's maybe the most important for long-term survival. Remember, we said money has a terrible energy.
Right. It can be destructive.
Very. It can be selfish, disruptive. Yeah. Art and culture are the forces that domesticate that energy. They tame it and channel it back into the society for good.
How does it do that? Yeah. How does culture tame money?
2 main ways. First, it makes people spend that accumulated wealth on shared things. Museums, theaters, public art, literature. Things that refine society and can't be hoarded by one person. And second, and this is so vital, culture is our memory transfer system.
Memory transfer?
Yes. Through biographies, stories, art, music. That's how we pass on the wisdom of the past, the lessons learned, the mistakes made. It's how we prevent the next generation from driving the whole system off a cliff. If you stop investing in art and culture, the system starts to forget. It starts to eat itself.
And when it does start to eat itself, when those gears grind to a halt, you call that the primitiveness cycle. What does that inverse cycle look like?
It's the exact mirror image of progress. It starts with dogma instead of philosophy. Free thought dies. Then, science is replaced by superstition. And when you can no longer innovate or create,
you have to import everything.
You must import. You buy the technology that someone else made with their functioning cycle.
And that leads directly to debt, I imagine. Because you're just buying, not producing.
It's an inevitable slide into debt. You spend your savings, then you borrow. And when the debt becomes overwhelming, the social fabric tears, and you end up with the final stage. Centralized, arbitrary rule, despotism.
That whole cycle, it feels like it could apply to anything, a company, an individual. Is this formula something that scales down from the national level?
It's a perfect fractal. It applies everywhere. There's a saying that earning money takes skill, but spending money takes 10 times that skill.
Hmm.
The reason so many wealthy families fail is because they get to gear 4, they make the money, but then they stop. Out of fear or just habit, they refuse to invest back into the softer gears, into philosophy, into art. They hoard the energy.
So that's the difference between just being rich and being truly prosperous.
Precisely. A rich person, a Zengjin, they just accumulate. And often they're disliked for it because the wealth is taken out of circulation. But a prosperous family, of our Lekle family, is one that understands the cycle. They use their money to fund cultural institutions, to take risks on new ideas. They use Gear 4 to power Gear 6 and Gear 1 again.
They restart the engine for everyone else.
And that's why they're admired. That's the definition of lasting affluence.
This really clarifies the whole hierarchy. Money is just the output. It's a measurement, like a temperature reading for the system's health. But the actual source of the heat is way back at the beginning, with free thought and science.
And that is the one lesson from history that never changes. No emperor, no sultan, no modern ruler has ever been able to control the flow of money with force or with decrees. It doesn't work. Money follows the strength of this six-gear system. A ruler's political power is nothing compared to a society's collective investment in those first and last gears. Philosophy and art.
So, since money is the result of this whole system, and we know this applies to countries, companies, and to you as an individual, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider. Where in this cycle do you need to begin? Is your challenge in the thinking, the questioning? Is it in turning your knowledge into a real application? Or is it protecting the value you've already built? The entire cycle is a blueprint, just waiting for you to turn that first gear.